up to 8 years old. But I don't think until we started to dive into some of the details with regard to what does it mean when we talk about the useful life of a server versus a computer.
But one of the challenges is, even more than the hardware, which
Yeah.
I know people that have 20-year-old computers.
Yeah.
The real issue is when software outdates. So for instance, older versions of Microsoft Office products and so on, and server products, they get to a certain point where they give you a year's notice and say, we're gonna stop support.
That's exactly where we are, John.
Yes.
Yeah, so if that's what it is, it's the
That's what it
software.
is. It's,
And to run the newest software efficiently, then you need new
We're
servers
on
and so
operating
on.
software 7, Windows 7, and that expires in
that's-
January 2020.
2020.
So we
And
have
I
to
think
go
that's an
to-
important thing to
Seven.
say, because when you
Or
don't
seven.
have any future support from the manufacturer, nor will it support security upgrades, now you got a big issue. That's what we have to.
and even
Say.
broader than that is a security issue. I mean,
That's what
we
I'm
would
saying,
totally not be compliant. They don't have patches anymore for outdated equipment. We have nobody to call if something breaks down. And we totally would be, opening ourselves up to a massive security breach if we're not up to date with our equipment and software. So, so what I did in order to help fit to make sure that we're still in
I don't want to hear
accordance.
these words about the security breach. These servers are not connected to the internet in any way. The reason you have to be careful saying those things when they're not true. We've worked very hard to not have them connected. There is an issue that somebody could physically come in the building, get a password, get on one of the terminals and that. But the good news is, these are not, we don't want to get into a big discussion at town meeting about security breaches of our network at town hall.
I think if we just sort of say that
I
support
just
for the
worry about what we
software and
say.
support for the hardware will be ending, and without that support, we will not have the resources to ensure that they will stay up and
I
operate.
think that's the issue.
We have
And
reasons
we
to
don't
say
say-
it, but
even
that,
put the
by
word
the way,
security
that's not
in
what we
there.
just said, we have to be careful. We didn't say that the hardware, we're saying that the software, upgrade the software.
You
perhaps
can't run
it's
the new
not worth it.
software on the old hardware.
They come as a package.
You cannot run the
For a
old
better cost.
hardware.
What's that?
They come as a package, the hardware with the software at a much better cost. and you
Much
get a
better,
bulk.
I'm with you, Lynn.
And a
This is
bulk.
no question in my mind, I've been through this. We're having trouble with, there's no question about, I have to talk about the Patriot, maybe different. But especially for these, the two domain servers, we have to do them. They're failing intermittently, which is causing outages. They're old, so we can upgrade the hardware in pieces, but that's very expensive. And more importantly, we're having outages that people can't work, okay? And lastly, the fact that the software is no longer supported a year from now. So in a sense, yeah, we got a good reason to do it. I'm not arguing about that.
Okay.
I just want to be careful though that when we say things, we don't say things that are almost wrong.
No, we don't have to say anything about security, but remember, the new 64-bit software does not run on the 32-bit machines
Okay?
with any efficiency.
Okay, fine.
And so that's why you replace them together as a package.
Okay.
Let's move on. Kelly, I've got a question.
$26,000.
You put
Yes.
the servers in the special town meeting?
Yes, and
Why?
the reason
Tell
why
me
is
why.
because those are critical, and the sooner we can get those replaced, the better.
Okay.
That's the reason,
That's
because
the
we can
answer.
get them 2 months sooner
Sooner.
That's the answer.
than if they're in the budget.
Then you can go to work on your workstations.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Got it.
But
So-
also, this $26,000 fits better in with our capital allocation and the guidelines from the FinCom. So I thought it also just, it sort of just all fell together.
So what's the explanation then on our workstations? This is essentially to replace all the workstations at
Yes.
once in the town hall?
Yes,
Yep, they're all basically the same age. The maintenance is easier when you're all on the same level. And they're not gonna be supported, any of them. January 2020, the operating system is unsupported, and Microsoft becomes unsupported in
Good.
the summer.
And how many are there, just so we know?
26.
what is it there? What is it?
26.
26? Oh,
And we-
oh, it's 26, I thought it was 26,000. Oh, it is 20.
Yeah, it's 1,000
Okay,
it's
each
just computers
for
at $1,000
the
bucks a
software and the
piece.
hardware.
You can handle that, man.
And we might be able to get a better price off the bid list.
Yes,
It-
yeah, but,
It may not cost you $1,000 a
It
piece.
might not.
Now with
that
Chromebook
includes the
technology.
installation too. We're
Yeah,
assuming at least
still.
2 hours per station. I mean, our goal is to get it less than that, and we'll
I
get.
haven't read the details. What's in the software package that we're thinking about? In other words, do we have enough money that we're really also ensuring that we're getting the software applications we want?
It's a Microsoft
Like
suite that we
Adobe.
currently have.
It's an upgrade
Yeah,
of the
well, there may be some
existing,
problems with that. It's not consistent apparently across all the
they
workstations.
usually,
But now it will be because they're all going to the same suite.
and
Including
they
things
provide
like
migration paths.
Adobe Distiller and things like that?
Yeah, there are migration paths for old databases to
I'm not worried
transfer.
about that, I'm worried about the tools that we're getting, the
Same
software
tools.
tools.
They currently do not have Adobe that can, it's not the paid version, so.
So we have some places do, some do have it.
They have the basic Adobe, that comes with the
Everybody does.
package, everybody does,
But
but
some
what they
have
don't
the-
have is the paid version.
Some do, right? Some
I haven't
workstations
found
do.
anyone yet who says that they do have it, but all I've heard from is the people who say they don't,
Yeah.
so there may be
I
some
think
that do.
And that's what I was asking, to try to understand.
It would be a consistent package across the board, everyone gets the same thing.
Which could be a problem if it took away something from somebody. We really, okay, we should talk about it. You understand what I'm saying? If somebody already has something, two people have it, and the rest don't, and we get a full package in, everything's good, except these people say, gee, I used to be able to do this,
Well,
I
I don't
can't do it
think we
anymore.
want to shortchange
We need to
anybody.
understand what those things are, and decide whether, gee, two have it, but that's what's a problem for everybody else. We really need to get it for everybody else. Increase the price on, that we're saying, not $1,000,
What we're
but
hearing is that the
$1,030
people
or
who
something.
don't have the paid version are very unhappy and need it. So it looks like we should go to that paid version.
And all I'm asking is, does this $1,000 a piece include that sort of thing?
It was an estimate, so we'll have to look now at specific prices when we go to the bid list and see.
Which we should do before we go to town meeting, though, right?
This just came through, so yes, you know.
Microsoft Office 2019 is an upgrade from Microsoft 10,
Oh, yes.
or Windows 10.
Can I just ask about the screens? Are the screens being replaced also?
No.
Okay, that's a good answer to have right out. And it almost, if somebody gets up and talks at town meeting, it'd be good to point that out.
It's just the CPU.
Keeping, this is the machine itself.
The next articles, I think, look familiar. I still have a little bit of work left to do. I've been working with the department heads on the additional descriptive language, so there's a couple of notes that are still there. So I'll be working on that next, and should have that go after tomorrow.
Could I just ask about our process a little bit? We closed the warrant on the 25th.
For
We
citizen
just take,
petitions.
what's that? The citizen petitions?
The 22nd is when we opened
22nd,
and
excuse me.
closed the
So-
warrant, and that means
The
that
citizen
citizen
petitions.
petitions, yes. So nobody can, unless they come through the Board of Selectmen, nothing can be added on here. Unless we decide.
In the past, when we closed it, it was closed.
No.
And if we wanted to add or change something, we would open it and close it again. But if we change the process, I'm just asking about the process. The process is that closing the warrant only relates to citizen petitions. What about from a department request? No? Or it's included? Which color?
What you have here is what I have in the warrant. If there's something you don't want, vote and we'll
Just
take
the
it off.
process. I just asked them the
The
process.
process is I am juggling all of these balls so that we have a warrant to the printer in time. And I am putting things on that I'm aware of. I'm taking things off that are redundant or are unnecessary, and I'm putting on the special town meeting warrant. We're discussing each article here so that we are ready to go to print. If you have any objection to anything on this list, this is the time that you bring up the concern and you let all of the board members vote if something needs to come off. I'm
Thank you.
happy to do whatever the board would like.
I can't remember when we took that vote. Do you remember the date that we took the vote, when we said, when we're opening it, when we're closing it, et
It was like
cetera?
the 30th of January or something like that. That's
It's
okay.
on board docs.
Let me just try to clarify that a bit. All we're doing at the moment is working with a draft document.
Yes.
Or 2-4.
We haven't
but-
taken any actions to put anything else on or take anything off the warrant.
But I
It's
think
all
it's
informal
clarified
at
though
this
that
point.
closing the warrant, I think, related only
I'm
to
not
citizen
sure about that, I
petitions.
don't wanna have a debate.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure about that. But
Next.
what I'm sure about is that this is, at the moment,
A
an
document.
administrative
Yes.
function.
Yes, sir.
And I've been told, I know by by council in past years that we at any time can add or subtract. I do think off the top of my head that we opened it and closed it
I
to
think so.
do that.
We did.
But we're
I
not
think
doing
so.
that now.
We're just talking about
putting
administrative
together
things. Thank you.
draft on.
I'm with you.
I think you can add anything up to the time that it goes to the
Yes,
printer.
but we may have a point at which we open and add a bunch and take a bunch out in a 5-minute period sometime in the future. Okay.
Library, 19th, elementary schools. I got some further information from the superintendent. I'm referring to Article 19, the surveillance and security systems. I got some additional information from them. Today, I have to go through that, make sure that this description is accurate. But then also on Monday, the superintendent has offered to come to the board meeting to address the board with respect to some of the articles that are on here, including this one. And also the other one was for the establishment of the special education revolving fund, reserve fund. So just want to let you know that if you have any specific questions on this item, it still needs a little work, but you'll also have the opportunity to speak with the
19th we're
superintendent.
talking about.
19th, yes.
19.
The school surveillance and security systems, correct.
Just for how we work together, we have $300,000 from the FinCom, and that's band 1. This is band 2. So what are we asking the FinCom to do? To essentially expand their allocation of 300, and if they choose not to, then this wouldn't make it?
Correct.
Okay, okay. So this is, the FinCom, this is over guidelines, but we're suggesting we want it. That's a good summary, right? Okay, thank you.
Santa Cruiser, I don't think there's anything very different from that.
Just a clerical, you need an extra little star guy on 19th if that's part of the
Number
third,
19.
right? Need another asterisk if that's, the number of asterisks tied to the consent agenda, no?
Article 19th is 3.
Yeah, 3
Asterisks.
stars.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at an old thing.
There you
Oh,
go.
You're probably looking at different.
Online is the only 1.3 we have.
So while we're at this point,
Share.
the moderator does have a question, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say the finance committee allocates and expands their guidelines, and all of these items are part of the positive action taken by the finance committee. Why do we need them to be in a separate agenda? Could we not include it in the first agenda as well? It's the second agenda, but it's all the capital items. So,
I segregated them specifically because of I'm specifically trying to compartmentalize them, and I didn't want to be too presumptuous to assume
right,
that because they went over guidelines that they would automatically be funded
I
and
understand that
affirmative.
entirely, but if they do get funded,
Then we can
okay.
group them however we'd like with any consent agenda
Okay, so
item.
everybody understand that the
Got it.
fewer the consents, the easier it's gonna be, because people get sick of having these kind of,
Right, I was sitting on a question, but since you kind of brought it up, so,
You mean the fewer
Number
consent
of them.
groups?
yeah.
Yeah, like I've done this as,
Put all the
Group
consent
3.
together in
Yeah,
one big one
yeah.
would be
But,
Right.
ideal.
as
I mean,
long as
let me
they
just
have, as long as they have a relation to each other. The first consent is perfectly fine, because
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You like to see clustered,
this would
Right.
probably be with
Okay.
capital as a two
Okay.
asterisks if
all
it's a
right, we're on the
group,
same
but.
page.
I need information because I don't know how to answer this question if people ask me. So but let me be clear, I'm your biggest consent agenda fan. I really mean, I thought it was a wonderful innovation and I completely support the notion. But I'm losing track of what the underlying philosophy. As I understood it, the items we used to have or initially had in the consent agenda were those that were, to be colloquial, no-brainers.
show up the
Repetitive.
same way
no
year after
brainers.
year
And
after
that's
year.
the first,
Yeah.
and
The
that comes under
imbeciles
the
stuff.
first consent.
Right.
Right.
Not, and again, I'm mechanically in favor of consents, but I'm not seeing the.
All these capital ones, I have to
Those,
admit,
those have the history of being the most controversial
I
items
think
of
they
town
should not
meeting.
be a consent agenda, because I think 2 or 3 of them will get pulled out. And I also think, I'm a little concerned about the perception of voters that we're trying to push them through
Yeah,
without.
I couldn't justify to an.
I wouldn't want to do
question.
capital in this case. If we had a history of, $100 capital for this, for a gravestone, and they sort of added up to less than $10,000,
Yeah.
those would be
And
fine, but
I know
that's,
there's a difference of opinion, I'm about to say, but to me, we committed a while back to a police cruiser a year.
Yep.
So,
Pretty much.
People can disagree, obviously,
Yeah.
but to me, that has become a relatively routine, but like this, and I'm not saying in any way against school safety, Lord knows, but this, if you gave me a quiz, this is a classic non-consent agenda, so I'm lost in terms of, and then it ties to, my last comment, ties to something I think you said a few minutes ago, which is, if you put so much together that it starts unwinding, that gets crazy,
yeah.
So either we need a new philosophy on why we're doing it, or we need to, I think.
I'm
Take a
okay
look
just
at it.
taking the asterisks off of these. I did it more for organization and grouping more than anything else.
Well, I think unless, I'm not gonna vote, but unless there's a sense of the board to expand the underlying philosophy, we need to redefine what goes into a consent agenda, which I'm not hearing or seeing, then it still should be only those things that are, for lack of a better word, relatively routine.
I think we need to break these out. We
But
could put the cruiser in somewhere, but
to
all the
Kelly-
other ones are
To
different.
Kelly's point, you did these as a prioritizing funding priority.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm all for that. If you wanna take things that would have, and that's what town meeting is all about, really, is open discussion of whether the town should spend money on front-end loader as far as that goes. But
I can use,
understand that it's gonna expand the time.
But it's not gonna expand the time if we misbundle.
Okay,
Because if we that's why I said the first time, I mean it very sincerely. If 90% of this stuff was just a no-brainer, automatic kind of thing, then it's
Yeah.
one.
The other methodology that we've tried and didn't do very well at last year, but the other methodology used in other towns is that you group your capital together, because typically it's one article with multiple motions. We tried that didn't work,
Okay.
but that was sort of my thought process around the groupings, was you keep your capital stuff together, but the order in which these are here and how that's completely up to all of you, what you
Right.
wanna do.
The grouping's very effective.
The order is not the issue, the grouping is.
The grouping,
And the nomenclature, the asterisks
yes.
are the issue at this point in the conversation.
So that's why if you can give me some direction now or any specific thoughts, like should I be moving the cruiser up a little bit so it's before the bigger ticket school surveillance, I can do that?
I would say that if you're not clustering them by the bands that we've talked about, then I would put them in order and maybe have some discussion to say the priority order that we thought, because people in the audience have not had the time to understand which of these we feel are more important than another, or which ones are mission critical and which are not. So I think giving them some understanding of that, and maybe with the order of them, that would
Well,
help.
that's where I need your assistance, because I don't wanna presume to know what your priorities are as a board.
Let me make one suggestion, and that is, in the second grouping, you've got workstations, highway front loader, and vehicle replacement. Put the cruiser up in there.
Well, actually, the highway front loader, the workstations, the fire, and the generator were band one.
Yes, correct.
Those were the
That's
most
why I put
critical
those together.
that Kelly recommended to go into the 300,000 if we had to meet, if we had no more than 300,000.
I'm
And
sorry,
next-
you're talking about bands as opposed to groupings. I'm talking about groupings.
I think you're using the word the same.
I think
Yes.
it sounds like.
Yes.
I'm using the consent agenda. To me, the first consent agenda, single asterisk, are all sort of the stuff that we do every year and is
Yeah.
non-controversial. The second consent agenda opens up a little more, but they are things we typically vote for on a regular, if not every year basis. And that would potentially include the cruiser. I think, other than the cruiser, every
I
other
see.
3-star item on a 3-star consent agenda group 3 should be not consent agenda, should be,
Right, but then we're over, because to your
Over
point,
what?
if we previously said that we're gonna fund a police cruiser every year, and that's kind of a consent and shouldn't be a lot of discussion, when Kelly put together her recommendation for what would make up that 300,000, the cruiser was not in it.
so you're saying if we add that, we I don't think it makes any difference, we're still voting to spend the money.
Can I just say, that the whole concept of, the goals set by the, FinCom dissipates in the budget process. It's not even applicable to town meeting.
Doesn't matter.
It's
They
a
approve it.
budget-setting device.
Yep.
That goes until a certain point. It doesn't apply to, it hasn't historically ever applied to once it hits town meeting. It's the beginning of the budget process to give people guidelines, I'm sorry. is the word I'm looking for. The budget guidelines are historically inapplicable to town meeting. They're up till the end point in the FinCom process where the submissions are controlled to some degree, the departmental submissions based on those guidelines, so they just don't have to. Then the budget is balanced, and then it is what it is.
Okay,
And then
I'm a little confused then, because I
Okay,
thought the
so let
police
me try.
cruiser was going through a special town meeting, that's what you had said when you
No,
began.
That was
no,
the money
some
earlier
other
changed,
police.
Okay.
So,
So let me try, and I think you're bringing up an excellent point. I'm just gonna step in here. As far as the budget guidelines that the finance committee sets, and this is the checks and balances that both the Board of Selectmen and the finance committee have in creating a budget. The finance committee did put the $300,000 on those capital investments. But like Mark said, when it comes to town meeting, the finance committee recommendation stands by itself.
Right, it almost transposes the guidelines, and then we have a budget, and then it comes to us, then we control the warrant. They control the budget process, then we control the warrant. We can put $1 million on there, it has nothing to do with what their guidelines were. They can recommend it, or they can vote it down, so it kind of shifts.
Okay.
It's a device that isn't really carried over.
And it's really here that the order of the warrant and the priorities should be made, not the finance committee.
But if in discussions with the finance committee, we say, well, we're gonna put $1 million on, and they say, oh, okay, fine, well, we're gonna, no action on 700,000 of them. Then we may think about it and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't put the $1 million on, but we really want this one too. So let's put on this item for 150,000 and go for 450, and let's see how we can make it through with the FinCom voting no action on that one.
Yeah, but that, I don't
So I mean,
think
that's,
that's what we're
that's
talking
something that we wind up doing, it's a good thing.
There's a back and forth.
There's nothing wrong with it, it's just, or we may
I-
leave $1 million on.
To me, the order of the warrant is the script for them,
Sure.
and I think it shouldn't be looked at in all these components. It should be grouped in a way that's meaningful to the citizens. I would group it like with the focus of that evening, and put, I mean, it doesn't have to, like, I would tend to put vehicles together or whatever, and if there's 3 vehicles, and one of them you think is the most important, maybe you put that first of the 3. But they get, it's like a play, and you want the first act and the second act, and the third act becomes more meaningful. Or sometimes it's strategic,
Yeah.
you want to keep a certain group of people till later on, maybe you
Right.
put their one article later on, there's a strategic element to
Be a
it.
good reason to put the schools one later down in the
But
list.
has been done.
I'm a little bit of the opinion that capital items ought not be a consent agenda.
We probably get a vote from a number of people the same way.
Oh, it's expressed at one of the town meetings that we do not use the consent for capital items.
See, I think it's, we don't want to be perceived as being disingenuous is the word that pops into my mind.
That's right.
And it gives if we don't, I'm just gonna keep using the word routine, we can change the word, but if we start to use it for items that aren't routine, it's as if we're like sneaking something through or something.
Well, that $165,000 front-end loader is gonna create some conversation, in my opinion. And if it's part of a consent agenda, I think it confuses
It's gonna get
issues.
unwound.
Yeah.
So then it's really just consent one, because
One-
consent
one and-
two,
I could do one and, well,
because
two.
consent two had that front end loader
Yeah, well.
and
two
the
is-
fire vehicle
Most of the capital items are
Yeah.
in group
and the
two.
generator.
And I mean, what you could do is, the ones we do all the time that wouldn't be as controversial, in my view, would be number 14, Town Facilities Repair and Maintenance Fund, and the cruiser. Everything else is sort of here and there, doesn't happen on a regular basis, and people probably would like to react to, why are we getting a generator? Why are we replacing?
Well, I can tell you, there's gonna be some discussion about the police cruiser, because we have it every friggin' time it comes up.
I'll tell you
Well,
the
then maybe
reasons
we take
why
that
both
too.
of those could create a problem. It may not be because we're asking for a generator. It's why we're asking for $50,000 for a generator. That's where the question sometimes comes up.
Yeah.
Both, but especially for the amount. The second one, on the cruiser, how come it's 60,000? We usually spend only 40,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
Those, I mean, I'm not sure that people disagree with the item, but why is it so much
Agreed.
more expensive, or why is it this expensive? That's where the question may be. Here or there, I agree that they may very well create some questions.
Do you think the library maintenance would go up with be less controversial?
No,
You think that's gonna be controversial?
yes.
Really?
How much is it though? Is it
Well, they also
There's a
have
dollar
the
amount in here.
the Gould Fund, the library Gould Fund.
The dollar amount, I think, is in the order of 20,000, order of magnitude, something like that.
26,000 plus roof repairs of at least $10,000 to $20,000.
Oh, that's a different story. The amount of money makes a difference.
Yeah, that's big.
So then it's, on that approach, then I'd say, Town Facilities Repair and Maintenance Fund, that's 37,000, that shouldn't be on there either. It's almost like we're back down to
Well,
group
but
one,
it's-
period, that's it.
I mean, I know there's the number thing, but if this has already been, we've done this, right? The town facilities?
yeah.
And we intend it to be an annual meeting, and we believe that you have to have repair in it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I know it's subjective, but I would tend to, I could understand why that might be a consent item.
I could do.
Yep,
Yeah,
I'd take that as a consent item.
like I could just add that to consent one,
14.
just add it to one and.
Which one?
14, that's what you're talking
Yeah, but I think I'm coming around very much to the feeling, even though it's gonna make things last longer, people are gonna wanna talk about some of these things.
I mean, the other thing to consider too is, if you realize we've actually taken a lot of things off the agenda. It used to be over 50 warrant articles. Through the past couple of years, the Municipal Modernization Act has taken a lot of things off. So maybe that gives us more time to discuss some of these capital items, right? I mean, we used to have at least 50 and now
Well,
there's about 40.
I understand, the reason for the consent agenda was to try to save time,
Correct.
okay? But the opposing argument of that, we've gotta run the town business, and we gotta do it right, okay? No matter how long it takes.
Exactly. Well, that's fine with me. I mean, you're gonna really spoil the use and the purpose of the consent if you try and put so much stuff in
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah,
gonna
loses-
look like,
loses
it's gonna
its
be
integrity.
perceived that you're trying
Yeah.
to slide things
It
through.
loses its integrity.
And the bigger that grouping gets, the more
So-
complicated it comes in the voter's mind.
I'd like to suggest that we have only one consent agenda. Steve, I'm looking to you for
One
your
group?
consensus. One group, one consent agenda of a single group, which would be as noted here with the single asterisks plus the Town Facilities Repair and Maintenance Fund included. And then from that point on, they would be individual warrant articles.
Would you suggest the revolving fund should come after the repair and maintenance fund? Because before we were talking
Yes.
about it as.
The revolving fund
If
for
we
the,
include it, then we should.
for the public hall?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think-
it's gotta come after
Yeah.
It
the,
was gonna be
Consent.
13, but
Yeah.
if
Now
we
you'd
add
make that-
14 to,
exactly, now you make that 14, and
Yeah.
I've just adjusted, but,
Yeah.
I think that that's reasonable expectation, most people will see. The other thing is, when you see the ones that have, by and large, bigger numbers and sort of tangible things,
Mhm,
why are we buying
mhm.
that?
Yeah.
Yes, we will get more conversation. Does that make sense, Steve?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Just a note, Kelly found out today that this is actually phase one for the elementary school surveillance and security. This does not take care of it all, this is phase one.
Well, I need to get clarification on that because I heard something today from Steve that indicated that this wasn't just a one and done project, which was my impression all along. So I do need to look at this one a lot closer, and we need to get some clarification and ask some questions on Monday when the superintendent's available.
And then have that verbiage included in here,
Yes,
if it is a
yes, I need to
multi-phase,
update
to
this
let
section.
folks know.
I can tell you security systems are expensive, even though Masco's over twice the size of
It looks like it.
schools together, but we've spent well in excess of $500,000 doing security gear. And we still had an incident with the swastikas being painted in halls where we did not have surveillance of bathrooms. That's being added this year too, so.
Right outside the
Should
bathroom.
we-
Right outside the bathrooms.
Should we make the library maintenance or building improvement part of it?
To use high-def cameras for the next.
Is this gonna
Somebody said it's, library maintenance, somebody said it's controversial,
Yeah,
maybe
or
it will be.
somebody 30 feet away in the hall.
The moderator has a,
Oh,
the moderator has a suggestion that, a question, suggestion, however you want to phrase it, that, the question, if it's a question that, couldn't the water-related enterprise system items be put into a second consent?
I was going to suggest that before we have this other conversation.
Yeah, it would seem that there's a certain logic to that as well as,
Do you want to move the order, like move them up,
it doesn't matter what order they come in. as
so that
far
they're
as-
right after, so consent agenda 1, and then 3 articles for consent agenda 2 will be the water, and then you would go into the individual discussion, capital item,
Start the fireworks later.
and then push the school stuff down, because all the people will want to
Right.
stick around for that.
Well, the school security, I don't think there's gonna be much discussion on that. I mean, I think people,
I mean, since the water
Yes,
system
no,
is an
maybe,
enterprise fund, you could
That's what I'm
make that case.
yeah.
Exactly.
What's the sense of the school security system?
It's gotta be separate.
It's-
Oh, definitely separate,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I get a sense it's gonna, I mean, I.
People will ask questions about it, even if
Yeah,
they're in
maybe
favor.
ask
They're gonna
questions,
ask
but it's gonna.
What do we get for this? Why are we?
Yeah.
And you do a home system, you go to Home Depot and you spend $150.
There's gonna be a lot of people
Fair
saying
to
you gotta
understand.
pay what it costs.
There's a whole different set of
There's no choice.
requirements.
There's no choice in that kind of
Okay.
stuff.
Okay, so I think we've, so, let's see if we can skip ahead a little bit. So water system improvements, we'll move those up as a group to be consent agenda 2 asterisks with 2 asterisks.
Okay.
Everything else, I'm gonna take the asterisks off.
Yep.
I'm gonna be adding additional descriptive language wherever it has that little note. Still, the question keeps seeming to pop up is library maintenance and building improvements. Where do you get the sense, regardless of what the FinCom votes, where do you think that that should fit? Because, I mean, is sort of, we just leave it where it is, or should we be putting it closer
Is this an
to
annual thing?
maintenance?
Is this an annual
No,
thing?
well, it could become an annual thing, it's carpet replacement,
Mm-hmm.
painting, and roof repairs.
But it's not an annual thing. It wasn't
It,
last
it,
year.
well, yes, it will become an annual thing because they're suggesting that we would paint and carpet each floor of the library over the course of the next few years. So there would be a phased approach where you're painting the 3rd floor and replacing carpets on the 2nd, or whatever that schedule is.
I can imagine a lot of folks will look at that and say, building improvements, what do you mean building improvements? So I would not put that in.
I
consent
think the
agenda.
word improvement is wrong there. And
Whether
I
it's
think,
there or not,
and I
just
think
it's gonna
it's
raise
worthy of
questions.
discussion. When you, painting is typically not a capital item. This is, if the library needs more money for facilities maintenance, and they have budget for that, they need to increase that budget. Because if we're saying it needs to be done every year, we wanna do this floor, then this floor, then this floor, it's something that belongs in the budget and is ongoing and is not something that we want to have as, quote, capital items on a warrant.
Is that how we handle other buildings, so it would be consistent?
That would be consistent, except in the case of the schools, we did bond the painting of the exterior of the school. But when are we gonna paint the exterior of the schools again? Well, 10 years, 12 years, whatever.
But it's not
Now,
annual.
That was part
what
of
I
a
just
bigger
heard
thing,
Kelly
too.
say is, no, this is something that's gonna be recurring every year. They wanna do this floor, then this floor, then this floor, then that room,
It's a
then this floor, then
maintenance
this floor, this floor.
See,
If it's ongoing, then I believe it belongs in the budget.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. The question I have here is, it says building improvements in 2 places, and then no idea what that is. And I just think, if they're truly improvements, not better, I agree, with it, not painting carpets, but if there's something else they're gonna do, adding a skylight or
I think
putting
they were
new
adding a
stacks.
door, a front door that's ADA compliant.
So those are the things that need to be spelled out there.
Did you say
because-
also they're repairing their roof?
Yeah, the roof repair, there's, I think the flat part of the roof needs $10,000 worth of repairs. And the other section of the roof, she was waiting for a quote. The controversial part of this article is that there's another alternative funding source, and there's just a difference of opinion as to whether or not the other group should be funding it rather than having the
How about the
taxpayers.
Gould Fund?
Yes, whether the taxpayers should be
I
paying it
think
from
it's
our free
limited
cash.
what you can do with the Gould Fund.
There's differences of opinion, and I don't want to get involved in a political interpretation of what is the right or wrong thing to do. We have funded some projects before, but to me, we normally don't see anything on the for the library on this list unless it's something that is clearly like, I don't know, I said to the library director, safety related, we'll find some funds, we'll get some Maya safety money to pay for that. But there are alternative sources, and I think that would be, I mean, that's the sense that I got from the library director, because the last meeting that she had, they were told by the trust commissioners that they weren't going to be paying for maintenance for the library. Now, I don't know if that's gonna shake itself out, but in the meantime, I'm not making any decisions on that issue, so I put it on the warrant for further discussion and for the process to, have its course.
Is the recommended that the town vote to transfer, is that a placeholder language?
It's a
It has not
placeholder,
been
yes.
officially recommended by
Yes.
the FinCom yet.
Okay, correct, and I'm glad you brought this up. So my approach when I'm doing the warrant is to assume everything is written in the affirmative. Part of the reason is more of a practical, pragmatic reason is because it's a lot easier for me to
It's more data.
take it out and to write, 2 other things could be possible. It could
Recommend
say
no action.
recommendation pending further approval, or it could say recommend no action.
Yep.
So I always do it in the affirmative,
Yeah, gotcha.
so it's not to be presumptuous,
Yeah,
but it is
yeah.
there phrased that way because it's a lot easier to take it out when the FinCom makes their vote. So to answer your
So we
question, they
don't
haven't
know
voted
whether
for it.
it's gonna be on, so I
Correct.
don't know.
So anyway, okay, well, let's.
Well, it seems like you need to change the title of that particular.
I will, the improvement sounds a little confusing, and also we need to add the descriptive language, and I can address that with the library director.
And I would say, I mean, following Dick's thing, I would kind of agree that if this is gonna be something on a standard basis, if they're gonna ask for $40,000 now, do they need to basically start a plan to ask for $15,000 a year on a regular basis for this? And it becomes either consent agenda or, better yet, part of their budget.
Well, this is the, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, because we've told people in every building, if you want something and it's more than $5,000, don't put it in your budget because that's capital and you have to ask for it through the capital budget process.
But capital's not just the dollar amount, it's also, it has to reasonably expect it to last, depending upon the depth you use 5 years or
I
more.
agree with you, but in this town, everything that's more than 5,000 that doesn't fit into the operational budget ends up on the capital.
No, I'm just saying I would question the definition of capital in that case.
And I have, and I will continue to do so. I hear your point, but then we get stuck in this catch-22 where everyone's like, well, if you're not gonna give us a facilities maintenance fund, or you're not going to give us money in our budget for maintenance, then where else are we gonna get the money from, right?
It's
So,
like the police cars.
Just
Yeah.
for discussion.
3-4 years.
yeah,
I'd like to, I think, this is discussion. I think the wording on capital would tend to be this. You cannot come to capital and request capital unless it is at least 5,000
Right.
and has a life of at least 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. I don't believe there's anything that says, and I think we have to be careful with this, that says if you have something that's $9,000 and has a life of 10 years, you have to come and put that on capital. Because the schools are, example, totally different from that. There's been this encouragement that they have enough money to buy their computer systems or something, the replacement systems, which may very well cost more than $5,000. And for example, the highway department gets $50,000 for road maintenance. And it's clearly a capital kind, it's maintenance, but, well, maybe it is maintenance, it's not capital. It's a lot of money, but it's not and it lasts more than that.
Yeah, I know, it's a
But
great.
the only point I would say is, we should not say that they're not, the only point is, we should not say, no department is allowed to spend more than $5,000, that's for, what's a capital item. If they want to, they are allowed to come to capital if it's above the threshold. If it's above the threshold and they can afford it through their own thing, we're not gonna tell them they can't do that. That's my take on it.
Sounds like a conversation in terms of this library one for next year and request that they consider setting this up as part of their
What's
budget.
maintenance, what's
Yeah,
facilities
but for this year,
versus-
this is here, they presumably have not done a budget that includes this, since
Right.
they're asking
Right.
for it as a separate thing.
And if we really believe, and that's what we want to do, then, and we should be discussing a little bit with the FinCom, is put in the quote, the explanation at the bottom. The intent is to, in future years, because the library has been underfunded for facility, for maintenance, and the intent is to add this amount to the future library budgets. I mean, we have done that before in certain circumstances when we put something in. This is like, so there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing to do, if we think that that's necessary and that much dollar. Now, somebody's gonna be on the back of the envelope saying, here's how much the library is worth, how much are we spending? Because they already have this much in their facility, they do already have some, and how much more. So it's good discussion, but we better be ready with some answers.
And then to make it consistent, because we have now on the capital item here, town facility maintenance.
Mhm.
Well, we're
It's not capital.
moving, we're moving closer and closer and closer to a facilities management kind of thing, and a facilities budget.
That'll be different.
We're several years down the road, I think, but we're moving in that direction.
Well, the other thing is that
I think we should be
the
moving.
school buildings, because they have their own budget, they budget that maintenance in.
Mhm.
The library has its own library budget, it can be maintained there. It's like the town hall doesn't have its own budget, it's built into all this other stuff. So that this is a little bit like that, in other words, some things, town offices and so on, there isn't a separate budget that is another department, we are the department.
So that's the discussion, whether we start to move it into,
Boyd's point on
The
facilities
departments.
management, which I think is a totally great idea. And then you think about handling, again, it's cost effective if done properly. You get somebody who's a facilities manager for town-wide buildings.
that we put in, and that actually got rejected?
No, it's still out there, we haven't got a vote yet.
Okay. Because I didn't see it on
It's
here.
Yeah.
No, it's not a warrant article, it's part of the budget request, so it's an essential unfunded item for consideration by the FinCom, and they'll be voting on those individually, and then adding money into the budget or making a recommendation for other funding source.
If done properly with the amount of real estate we have here, number of buildings we have, that position probably would pay for itself, but it takes a few years for it to catch up with.
Well, the first step is taking place now with Kelly's grant that she
I
got
think it's great,
to provide this facilities management plan.
I think it's great, that's good.
And that's gonna give us a scorecard to go on in terms of
So,
how much maintenance these
That's the
things.
So for this-
facility dude?
Yes.
for this year, do we leave this in here and ask for more explanation? And,
For the library?
yeah,
Yeah, I assume, yes. Well, I mean, it's there because the library board of trustees and the library director requested it. What the finance committee does or recommends is their own situation. But I did put it on there out of courtesy for the library. Let me see, so if you skip, so was there any issues with the water? I mean, these have all been, they were submitted by Greg, they
That's gonna
were
be
reviewed.
Didn't we decide to do a two-star
Yeah,
agenda?
yeah, I just didn't know, no language changes that, town council did go through them, to make sure that they, we had to add including all incidental and related expenses, yada, yada.
Just for record, nothing to be done now. I may talk with Greg on this water improvements, water system improvement. I was the one who got that fun idea started, and this has been expanded a little bit, so there may be a change to it after I talk with them. Leave it as it is now for sure.
Along that line, everybody's aware of the fact that we're making water with the approval of the.
Let me go get a drink.
It'll take a while to get the
After
pipes
years of
flushed out.
Okay, so the last ones are pretty standard. I had a question about, and I submitted this to Greg as well. We have Article 25th, the general stabilization. The amounts that are in here are just the customary amounts. I mean, the FinCom has the ability to change those. We've got the capital stabilization fund as well as the OPEB trust fund. I did inquire as to whether or not we are keeping this as is, or if there was any intent or discussion as to whether or not the water enterprise was going to resume making a contribution. That would be the only thing that might be updated as we move forward, but I haven't heard back yet.
Making a contribution to OPEB?
Yes.
Okay.
They did it for, I think, a couple of years and then they stopped.
To OPEB, the,
Okay,
post-employment
they may-
benefits liability fund. They have
The
employees.
question came up, but I don't think it was ever answered, so I just wanted to
Okay.
close the loop on that.
Okay.
Are they independent in terms of their
Yes.
OPEB obligation?
It's separately accounted for.
Okay.
It's a separate trust. The point was that they were way over compared to percentage-wise, but maybe now they're not, but they were way over with the amount that they, much less money, but for the number of employees, way over.
So they were, okay.
Okay, so Article 28, this used to be the old, so we moved this one, this was the revolving funds.
Yep.
Okay, so this used to be revolving funds, and when I moved it around, the public safety group has been meeting, this was one thing that came up. Now, could it wait a year? I'm sure it could, but I just sort of put a placeholder in there because I wanted to just get a general consensus as to interest in this. With the rec center and new GIS guidelines with respect to marking addresses and consistency and conformance with state regulations, some other towns have done a general bylaw that essentially allows a process by which you would you have address assignment in a process. And so there's a guide that they gave us with some information. I just thought that I would say this, I'm not going to speak too much to it, but I put it as sort of a placeholder in case the fire chief wanted to speak to this a little bit more. I do know that we have been meeting, we have been inviting the rec center operations director to come to our meetings, and he has addressed, and we're discussing on a regular basis, the fact that the non-conformance with regard to certain addresses has become more of an issue because of these new standards, but also because working with the rec, there are people who refer to their address as one thing, but then when there's an emergency, sometimes it'll cause an issue with response time if it's not being called in according to what the official street address is. So really, this really just allows the town to accept a bylaw that would basically write out who assigns the addresses, how do they do it, and what the regulations are. So I have more information on it, but I just put that as a placeholder because it seemed very time sensitive rather than waiting another year. But I just didn't know if you had a feeling either way, you wanted to leave that open for now until we talk with the fire chief. She's gonna be at Monday's meeting as well, if you wanna talk to her about, I just thought that it sort of, at the time, it just seemed like we're taking one out and I could put that one in.
I'm gonna vote against it, because the numbering system at Great Hill is a friggin' mess, and I know that my address is gonna change.
With the
I think-
addresses.
I'm joking,
think-
but I know it's gonna change.
I think the key thing here is, it's March, we need to get this done. There needs to be some work done for this, it's something that has been known for a while as an issue,
Yeah.
should we do it, shouldn't we do it?
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing it up, but my suggestion is, at this hour, I would ask that we put it on the agenda for the June 15th meeting.
June 15th, like
June
June
15th.
15th?
I don't know, whenever the one is, a month after
Whenever the
town
one we
meeting.
were all on summer vacation, remember that?
Yeah, whatever it's
No,
gone.
If it's something that's worthy of talking about, I mean, I know somebody on whose address is 48, but they only use 50 because they like 50, and, I mean, that.
So
Yeah,
this,
and I-
since we don't have a growth
I'll bet I
rate,
know who you're
So
talking
we have,
about.
it is something that is to be addressed, but it's the kind of thing that's worthy of being
I'd
addressed
like a lot
over
more
a period of
information
time.
on it.
Okay.
With people being
Alright.
involved and
We'll
making
stick a
sure that
pin in it.
everybody knows and you
How
call
about that?
ones that are an issue. and-
When you said our next meeting, I thought you meant our next town meeting. We're talking about the next elections meeting.
No, I'm saying a month after.
No,
We
we'll,
don't wanna start this next March, we
Yeah.
wanna start this in June.
because we don't have much
Stick a
growth
pin
in
in it.
town, this would be adjusting existing addresses
Pretty much.
to fit some.
Pretty much.
It may be adjusting
I
what
think it's
people
just moving
think is
forward.
their address, so what?
Who assigns the
It's-
address, how is it assigned, and what are the regulations that make sure we're consistent, we're all in conformance?
Yeah, it seems a little late for this.
That's fine.
Yeah.
There's so many questions.
That's fine. Okay, so 29th is, these are pretty straightforward in that they are, first of all, they're more housekeeping than substantive. They are 2 articles that really are just looking to clean up and do some housekeeping with regard to the zoning bylaw. They are going to have a public hearing on the 19th, I believe, to discuss these. They've been reviewed and formulated with the help of town council. So I don't know that there's too many questions about that, but, and then, of course, the planning board has submitted these, and they're, effectively, they're requesting them.
So on the zoning, I'll just tell you, that, for example, it's good that the planning board wants to fix things here. One of them is to add in, is to address the special permit granting authority. I would speak at the public hearing on this one. I'll just give you the very quickly. In here, it adds a section, so it's not just that. It adds a section about C, which is that the Board of Selectmen is responsible for the signage. That is also in the Article 13 about signage. It's very difficult to have 2 things saying the same thing in a document. It's sloppy. Secondly, in the explanation, it agrees that there is also special permits done by the zoning board, but we didn't choose to put them in as D here. So I just let you know that I am gonna speak on that. It's not a big deal, but I'm gonna speak on it because it doesn't make sense.
The next one, Article 31st, is regarding, so the next grouping, if you will, is really with acceptance of Mass General laws. There are 3 that are placed on the warrant for consideration. The first one, Article 31st, local meals excise. I know that Lynn, you suggested, you gave me some additional,
Yeah, I gave it to Debbie, I made a copy for everybody. Could you hand that out again? Oh,
Yeah,
great.
we got it.
Some additional verbiage that should be in there, because I don't think anyone's going to understand the impact of this and what it would do for the town and who would be paying it. So I think this would clarify, similar to the verbiage that went in for the elementary schools for the surveillance cameras. It gives them a bigger picture before they make a decision.
$50,000 a year
Great,
based
Yeah.
upon this.
that's enough, yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, on this, in the warrant itself, could we just put a 0 before the 7.5? It's consistent with the other uses, other entries,
yeah.
and it's much better to have the 0 there.
yeah, up above,
It is.
in the
On the
article,
warrant
at the
portion.
top.
Oh,
Yeah, I added it to the other ones.
Yeah, the zero's not there in the-
I missed, I
in the
added
first
it to the
paragraph,
other
Steve.
ones.
So I think probably people didn't know that we generate 7 million in restaurant revenues in the town, because I think people just think downtown and think there's not much there, so. And the fact that the majority of that does come from the event venues, the Topsfield Fairground, and probably Dunkin' Donuts. And the majority of the people who go to all of those are from outside of the town, coming in to enjoy Topsfield. And it also just, probably people don't even realize they're paying it now in every town, just about every town that they go to around here. We're
So-
supporting their towns and schools.
Should this be in the description, do you think, or should this be something that, say, you would get up to speak to?
Well, I think it should be in this description, because it would give people a chance when this is mailed out to
Okay.
understand
That's-
what's in it.
Yeah, as long as we
Okay.
keep the descriptions reasonably small, no political, all facts, that's how they should be used.
Yeah, so, I
It's
mean, if
very
anyone
helpful to
has
people.
any changes to this, I just think it will give more information so people understand what
Incorporate that in.
the concept is.
My only question is, do we have some kind of basis in fact for the assertion that a preponderance of the people are non-residents?
Fairgoers.
Is it just
Yes,
to go
fairgoers
from
are
somebody, or-
500,000 people go to the fair, and there's 6,000 people in our town. And the event venues are from out of town, going to the Commons and to Willowdale.
All the outside weddings and everything.
Yeah,
There are
There's
some that
some.
are in town, but the vast
There's some.
preponderance.
and that's why I put
Out-of-towners.
it, the majority, there are some who are in town. And relative to Duncan, I actually don't know the statistics, but you've got a lot of traffic coming from the Ipswich way and from the Boxford, going back and forth. So that I don't know, but even the one establishment, if you look at the numbers, you see it's consistently around $3,500 or $4,000 that they project would be coming in for the meal tax over each month. And then it spikes in September and October because of the fair, and then it comes back down again. And the colder, kind of uglier months, like February or so, weather-wise, it drops a little bit. So probably not as many weddings are being held or whatever, but other than that, it's fairly consistent.
Don't you need an effective date, Lynn, on this?
That's a good point.
Just so you'll be able to get the information out, because I wasn't
Yeah.
sure on the process, how, was it paid every month, or, you might want to put an effective date here. and give
The
yourself
effective
some-
date when the taxes would begin to be charged?
Correct.
That would be, that's an excellent point. It would be July 1. There's a time frame of when,
Okay.
you have to do it at the start of a quarter, and you'd want to get it in time for the
State
Fine.
Topsfield Fair, so July 1, and we have enough time to actually do that.
So add that into the description.
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's a good
Yeah,
point.
that's a good point. Okay, next to Commission on Disabilities and the Special Education Reserve Fund. These are two local acceptance options. And yeah, I don't know if you all had a chance to review some of the wording. Now, the Commission on Disabilities can be as large as 13 members. I just picked 5, just based on my own my own witnessing of trying to get other volunteers, but that's certainly within the board's discretion how they want to do that or recommend it. It has to be at least 5 members, but no more than 13.
So my question on this is, there's nothing in it, if I didn't know about this, doesn't say what a Commission on Disabilities does.
It's all up here in the, serving as a resource to the town, ensuring compliance with applicable state and federal laws affecting people with disabilities, reviewing, making recommendations about town policies, procedures, services. So it's mostly in that article. One of the
It's kinda
reasons this
general.
is on here is partially because one of the grants we did apply for in our ADA compliance or self-assessment stated that we would be bringing this before town meeting to have them vote. I know that if we do have a Commission on Disabilities, it opens us up for additional grants that we can apply for, but it also allows us to create a board by which, one of them doesn't really affect us. It's in other towns where they have a lot of parking management, they need someone to sort of decide, the
I've not felt
legality
that
of
there's
it.
a gap in the services and support we provide for our community. There are obviously some people who are disabled, though not apparently a large percentage. But at the same time, as soon as you say it opens up an avenue for grants,
But it does add to the complexity
Of
of
course.
town government.
It does.
it always
Because
does.
this has very strong rules about how frequently they need to do it and the reporting that they need to do to the state. So when we talk about things like mandates and costs, this is one of those things that tends to do the cost. Now Kelly is absolutely right. We are obliged to do this because we accepted the grant for the elevator. It was right in the grant that we would do this, and we signed off on doing it. As a matter of fact, so I had in here, adding the words in reference to this, that as a condition of a grant that the town received to fund the elevator in the town hall, the town is obliged to offer this option in the warrant. And I think it's like a note at the end, because somebody would ask, well, why the heck are we doing this? In my mind, we're doing it because we have to do it. I think if we're doing it to, quote, get more grants or whatever else, I think we're asking for trouble based on the experience, and you just have to read the statute and to see the things you have to do and frequency of, this fits very well for Salem and Cambridge and things like that. I don't believe it's an issue within our community. We have the ADA coordinator do all those things. I think this is just one